All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Victor and Rosie, are we okay? Victor and Rosie, yes? Yes. Okay, great. So I need to ask everybody to get started here tonight. We're hoping to have a lot of different people from the community here tonight. Let's see, we got a number already here. We have 2 interpreters helping us with this evening's meeting. And in order for everyone to hear what's going on, I need you to look at the bottom of your screen and you should see what looks like a little world. I want you to click on the world and it's going to ask you which language you want to be hearing the meeting in, English or Spanish. Okay. All right, so I'm going to hope that I hear something from my interpreters via chat to me. And I just want to let everyone else know that we're gonna get here we are right now. This is our interpreter, so everybody needs to do the interpretation, this world that is being shown there. And then also click which language you want, and then mute the original, which is the English, right? That's 3 steps there. Next slide, please. Okay. All right. So Rosie or Victor, can you put your screen on for me and just give me a thumbs up? Working? Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So again, I just want to say thank you, everybody. Sorry for that little awkward moment there of not being able to see everything that was going on. But my name is Donna Silverberg. I'm going to be facilitating tonight's public meeting. Many of you I see on the list, many of you were here at the meeting that we did in person in Eugene. Some were in person, actually, I should say, and some were online. We did a hybrid meeting in July. And many people then asked if we could come back in the next, say, 3 to 4 months and give an update on what's going on with regards to the J.H. Baxter facility and the work that DEQ and the Oregon DEQ and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency are doing at the site. So that is what this evening's meeting is about, is to give some updates on all of that, let you all know what's been happening, what's planned to be happening next. As I said, I'm Donna Silverberg. I've been working as the facilitator of the core team of people who have been working on this. I'm going to say a little bit more about them in a minute, and have been facilitating a number of these public meetings. So really appreciate you all being here. Really appreciating so many of you spending your evening with us. And by evening, we're planning to go, as you can see with the agenda here, from 6 until 7:30. We had actually figured this afternoon that there might be a little bit of some slack here because of the Zoom functioning and everything that we just did. So we're still on time, don't worry. So tonight what we have planned is that we're going to start with a background and overview by EPA of what's been going on at the site. They're going to then pass this over to folks at DEQ. Brad Schultz there is the manager at DEQ that's going to be talking about that. Randy Navis from EPA will be talking from EPA's perspective. They'll be talking about what's been happening with the residential cleanup efforts, what's happened so far, what's planning to be next. And then DEQ will pass it back to EPA to talk about the investigation efforts and what they've been finding, what they're planning to do next, what the process is from here, and that the integrated assessment that we've been doing so far. Then we move on to some question and answer. And we want to invite you to use the question and answer. If you look at the bottom of your screen or wherever your bar is on your screen, there's a Q&A. We decided to do this in the webinar tonight for a couple of reasons. The last time we did one of these all online, there was a lot, as people were coming in, there was a lot of noise we were having to do with all that. We thought the webinar would just be an easier, cleaner way to do this. We are recording tonight, so people who can't make it, we can make sure can see what's going on here tonight. And so I just, again, want to say welcome to Senator Manning. I see Senator Manning is here, and I know someone from Representative Fahey's office is here, someone from Congressman DeFazio's office is here, and also from, who else did I see is here? Oh, we've got Shannon Davis, who is the Deputy Director of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. She has joined us tonight. Thank you, Shannon. Really happy that you are here. Let's see, it looks like Nick Hash from the Department of Interior has joined us tonight. And I saw someone from Senator Murphy's office, I thought. Yes, I did. Wonderful. Great. And a number of folks from the press, and importantly, many people from the community. So welcome to all of you tonight. And with that, Emily, if you can go on to the next slide, that would be terrific. So a moment ago, I mentioned that there is a core team who has been working on this effort together. We've been working together. We realized we had our 21st meeting last month. We've been meeting for just almost 3 years now. Representatives from these agencies, the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, the Oregon Health Authority, US EPA, the Lane County Public Health Division, the Lane Regional Air Protection Agency, the City of Eugene, Oregon State University, the Active Bethel Community, and Beyond Toxics, as well as community members. So it's been, we tried to create a balance table of agencies and community members and community representatives who have been representing your interests, you as community members, in conversations with the agencies, making sure that as the agencies are doing the investigations and the work that they're going to talk about tonight, that they're also hearing about the lived experiences of the community members so that they can hear whether they are seeing everything. And also, as some of our community members have said, making sure that they're not just looking at data points, but they're also looking at people as we're having conversations over the years. So we really appreciate everybody who's been a part of that core team. Helping us get ready for these public meetings and providing you with kind of information that they thought you as community members and others would be interested in seeing tonight. So with that, and if you can go to the next slide, please, Emily. As I said before, we've got Randy Natus, who is the on-scene coordinator for EPA in his shiny field work there, bright orange field nest. And then Brad Schultz from the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, who is the Western Region Cleanup Manager. So the two of them are going to be taking you all away for a little bit. We do plan, as I said, if you have questions as they're doing their presentations, go ahead and put them into the Q&A box. We'll keep track of those and come back to them later after they get through their presentation. So Randy, next slide, please.
Okay, Donna, should we introduce ourselves first before we get into this?
Yes, why don't you do that? All
right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Donna, and thanks everybody for making this evening possible. It's really amazing how much it takes even just to facilitate and set up and coordinate one of these meetings and make sure that it's all going to work. And even with all the hard work, there still are always going to be some issues. So thanks for everyone having some flexibility. And again, my name is Randy Natus, and my official title is Federal On-Scene Coordinator, and I am the EPA project lead for J.H. Baxter. I do want to take a little bit of time while I'm talking just to talk a little bit about myself and give a little background on my experience and why I'm really the right person for this job. So I've been in the environmental industry for over 23 years, and in my current role with EPA for 18 now. I'm originally from New York, Long Island, New York, matter of fact, and I was able to escape and head up to upstate New York when I left for college. And I lived in Albany, New York for a while. And I lived in Albany, New York. I then realized that it was in Albany, Oregon. And at that point, I started realizing that my compass, my life compass, pointed towards the Pacific Northwest, but it didn't get me there directly. I moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, and I started working with the EPA, and I immediately started working in a town called Anniston, Alabama, where I was working with a community that was struggling with widespread PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls. EPA was overseeing the cleanup of over 570 properties, and just from long-term contamination from facilities around that area. I also spent 2 years dismantling and cleaning up a large 750-acre steel mill, also in Alabama, very much like J.H. Baxter. There were tanks with hazardous materials, contaminated soils, and other health and environmental hazards throughout the area. I was involved with large train derailments, emergency responses, in some cases where small towns needed to be evacuated for a couple of weeks. From there, I finally made it out to the West Coast, but I was in San Francisco, and I lived in San Francisco, but I spent the better part of 6 years working on tribal lands down in Navajo Nation in New Mexico and Arizona, cleaning up uranium contamination in and around homes and communities from nearly 40 years of uranium mining that took place from the time around World War II all the way through the end of the Cold War. And finally, I was able to move in 2016 up to Oregon, where I've been helping communities and cleaning up mine sites, led small and large emergency responses, including having the honor of serving as the EPA's incident commander for the 2020 post-wildfire recovery efforts, where EPA cleaned up over 4,000 properties. We had over 250 responders working in 8 counties, including Lane County, removing hazardous waste and hazardous material from those properties. In terms of J.H. Baxter, Team EPA, we have over 6 experts, many on tonight's call, working on various aspects of the project, including environmental investigation, community involvement, public affairs, enforcement, and cleanup. EPA has been involved with J.H. Baxter since February of 2022, when we were first requested the help from DEQ. So I'll pass it over to Brad to introduce himself. Sorry, that was long, Brad.
Thanks, Randy. I'll try to keep mine shorter, maybe in proportion to my hair to yours. My name is Brad Schultz. I'm the Oregon DEQ Western Region Cleanup and Emergency Response Manager. Career Marine, still a reservist, but I've been in the Marine Corps for 19 years, and 4 of those years I was the deputy commander for a part of the Environmental Service Division for the Marine Corps, one of their detachments based out of Fort Lewis, Washington. So that's my background coming into this, and we've got a host of folks on the call. We've got everyone from our public information officer, Dylan. We've got the lead worker for the site, Don Hansen, and the project manager, Susan Turnblom, in addition to some others. So great working with EPA, and also the rest of the members of the core team. Donna, you do a great job facilitating, and we're really happy to have all of you here tonight.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you. Thank you both. Now, Randy, let's go ahead and take us off into more of the background.
Yeah. So thanks again, Donna, and thanks, Brad. Looking at the invite, the attendees list, I always notice that there's always new people joining these, which is fantastic, right? And so, but the job is for us is to make sure that we all are understanding what the project is and sort of the history and the background. And so just bear with me for the experts here, but for some of the newer folks. So, J.H. Baxter Facilities in West Eugene, Oregon, and it started its operations back in 1943. That's a long time. And they started treating various wood products. They were treating railroad ties and service poles, electrical service poles, cross arms, and they use water and oil-based chemicals. That's important. So the oil-based chemicals part. And so in 2020, so J.H. Baxter halted their wood treatment operation, closed the facility down in January of 22. So nearly almost 2 years ago. But over the past 80 years, the city of Eugene, it grew up. So did the community around the property. As the population grew, so did the environmental concerns around the facility. Odor complaints stemming from creosote and the use of pentachlorophenol. That was, again, the primary components in the wood treating process. And it continues to be an ongoing concern for the surrounding community. 80 years is a long time to use pentachlorophenol. And at the time, up until recently, it was one of the most widely used biocides in the United States. Biocide is basically a pesticide used to treat wood. So it prevents little critters from eating the wood. Therefore, these power poles and other uses, they last a long time. That was the goal. However, back in last year, in February 4th in 2020, EPA issued a final rule or registration review decision requiring the cancellation of pentachlorophenol as a wood treater, or as a wood preservative. EPA found that given the emergent viable alternatives, that the risks of pentachlorophenol pose to worker health outweighed the benefits of its use. At the same time, I mentioned earlier, EPA Superfund, which is the program that I work in, and others on this call today or tonight, started getting involved in February 22 when Baxter closed its doors and we got a formal request from Oregon DEQ to help. So since then, EPA has been working hand in hand with Oregon DEQ, and we've just begun to start scratching the surface on the extent, the size, the scope of the human health and the environmental concerns. We still have a lot to learn, and we certainly can't do it alone. But as this team move forwards, which is between community members, community organizations, local governments, state governments, and the federal government, we can do it.
Hey, Randy.
Yes.
I just got a little request to ask the speakers, I'm sure it includes me, to slow down just a little bit for the interpreters.
Oh, sure. I did mention I was from New York, and
I'm sure she heard that.
Talk really fast. And so I work very hard in slowing my talk down on the regular anyway. So I will try to do that again. In the last 2 years, working in and around the J.H. Baxter area and in the communities, EPA, we have met with community members. We've attended community events. We've co-hosted an in-person public meeting back in July. We've met with former workers, and we continue to meet with community members and environmental advocacy groups. Sorry. Over that same time frame, we've also sampled dozens of properties. We've conducted environmental sampling downstream from the J.H. Baxter facility, and we've completed a detailed investigation of the J.H. Baxter facility, all of which we'll discuss in detail later tonight. But that's the background. Hopefully I slowed down for the interpreters. And so at this point, I'd like to ask Brad Schultz from Oregon DEQ to discuss the latest ongoings with the residential work. So thank you very much.
Thanks for the background, Randy. Sharing just a bit more background on the residential sampling. Probably won't go into how we got to residential sampling, but in late May of 2022, Oregon DEQ determined this to be an orphan site. There was sampling needed in the community. J.H. Baxter said they couldn't pay for it, so the state of Oregon took this site on to manage the cleanup. And as part of that, we worked with EPA and we did a residential sampling in late May of 2022. During that sampling, there were 22 yards tested, and 17 of those yards came in above our residential risk-based contamination concentration for cleanup. So which is 4.7 parts per trillion. This testing told us two things. It told us, first of all, that the scope of the problem was more than we could really cover with Oregon's orphan fund. The DEQ has a certain pot of money for the entire state for all orphan sites, and 17 yards was too much for us to clean at once. So we worked with OHA and our toxicologist to kind of prioritize these yards and figure out which ones we needed to get to first. What they ended up determining was that we needed to focus on the yards at first that were over 40 parts per trillion of dioxin. And of those initial 17 yards, 7 of those yards came in higher than 40 parts per trillion. Next slide. The other thing that it told us was that we hadn't found the outlying areas of the dioxin contamination. We'd only kind of scratched the surface of what we were looking at there. So we worked with EPA and did additional step out sampling in March of 2023. Of that, we tested 32 additional yards, and 25 of those yards came up above 4.7 parts per trillion, with 4 additional yards over 40 parts per trillion. So when we talk about the 7 yards that we're cleaning up this fall, we're talking about those 7 yards from the first sampling. We have not yet worked on the 4 yards from the second sampling. Next slide. This is a stoplight chart that DEQ and OHA worked on together to kind of show the levels of dioxin. We'll kind of start at the bottom. At the bottom rung there is the 4.7 parts per trillion and lower, which is below our cleanup threshold, and it's very low risk to human health. In the middle, we have that 4.7 to 40 that is low risk to human health unless you're consuming eggs from chickens that are exposed to the bare soil. And then above that, the next level up is that 40 parts per trillion, which is a risk to human health, especially for children that are exposed to bare soil for off and on frequently for a period of more than a year, as well as other activities such as gardening if you don't clean off the vegetables and things of that nature. So that's why we focus on those yards over 40 parts per trillion, is because of the human health risk. Next slide. This is a timeline of the cleanup for 2023. On the bottom, you see a list of the coordination activities for the year. As you can see, we're in the last one. This is our, we had a public meeting back in July. This is another public meeting here. On the top of that timeline in the blue blocks, you can see sampling and cleanup activities that have been done over the course of the year. The first couple there are that step out sampling that we talked about that was done in March, as well as depth sampling on those yards to determine how deep the contamination was. So where we are right now is those 7 yards that we've been working on, those first 7 that are over 40 parts per trillion. We've been focusing on those, and we've been coordinating with those residents and our contractors. And you've probably seen a lot of activity in the neighborhood during early October, and that was removal of trees and vegetation so that we could get down to the bare soil so they could do soil remediation and removal. Where we're at today is today's actually the day that our bids for soil removal and remediation were due to our contractor that's working on this project. So we're going to go back, take a look at bids, see whether or not there's any bids that are acceptable, and cover what we're looking to do. And that'll determine when the cleanup begins on those yards as far as removal of the soil, replacement with clean fill, and replacement of vegetation. When we put out for bids, we specified that we were looking for them to start after Thanksgiving, and hopefully we'll have everything done before Christmas, or we'll put a break, some properties in the front, some properties behind, so that we don't kick people out of homes over holidays. So that's where we're at today. We've got our contractor going back to take a look at bids, see whether or not anything is acceptable, and we'll go from there. And then from there, we take a look at the results of the EPA residential depth sampling on those additional yards, and that'll tell us how deep we need to go, which determines cost for the additional yards that remain to be cleaned, and we evaluate those properties for future cleanup. Next slide real quick. This is a Spanish version of the same slide. We'll give a moment for our Spanish speakers to review the slide.
Perfect. Thanks, Brad.
Next slide. This is just a quick slide of the vegetation tree removal that we did earlier, kind of that first step in the process of cleaning up these 7 properties. You see that middle picture shows all the vegetation that was in one of these backyards. And as you can see, if you look to the picture to the right, you can now see bare soil, which means they can get in there, they can remove the soil, they can replace it with clean fill, and replace vegetation. So that yard is now prepped for additional work. Next slide. And these are from another project, but these are just to kind of show you what the next step will look like. What you'll see in those 7 yards, soil removal. As you can see from that middle picture, when they remove the soil, they wet down the soil so that they won't have contaminated soil dust in the air, and then replace it with clean fill. and replacing vegetation. And then the next steps for us and for EPA is to do more sampling to find the edge of the contamination, and to process and prioritize additional properties for cleanup. Next slide. Back to you, Randy.
All right, thank you, Brad. So we've over the last many months, specifically since our last public meeting, we got a lot of feedback that we really needed to explain the differences, or what really is Superfund, and what is a removal, what is a removal action, or what is a remedial action, just so we can have the same language. And so when we throw out some of these terms, we all are really understanding or on the same page. And so I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through the history of Superfund, what it is, and then where we are in that process and what some of the next steps can be. And so next slide, please. So what is Superfund? It's a term that we all use. Superfund site. It's a Superfund site. Well, the important part about Superfund is that it's a law that allows EPA to clean up contaminated sites and forces parties that are responsible for the contamination to either perform the cleanup or reimburse the government for an EPA or government-led cleanup. The history, Superfund didn't even exist until 1980, and there's some history and how it even got to become a law. And there's two primary sites, but then there's the third one that I'd like to talk about. The first site was Love Canal, back in the 1970s, really the 1960s, right outside of the city of Niagara, where there was basically a landfill. So it was like a large 16-acre landfill that no one really knew about environmental concerns and hazards and what that meant for residential communities. And why I'm saying these things, I want you to think about the history of Baxter. It started in the 1940s, right? And we're going to talk about Superfund, the law that has all of these cleanup requirements and regulations didn't even start till 1980. So in the 1960s, there's this landfill and that was covered up, and development they built homes on top of it. And over years and rain, they started getting some odors and residues in the basements, and people started getting really sick, and real bad things started to happen. And they started to evaluate it, and quickly they realized there was an environmental issue. There weren't laws and really federal regulations yet, and a blueprint of how to address this. But ultimately, 900 families were forced to leave their homes, and the site eventually, under President Jimmy Carter, was declared an emergency, and it was able to get cleaned up. Right around that same time of cleanup, in the late 1970s and early 80s, there was a Valley of the Drums. So there was another large 13-acre area that had all these drums that were unearthed. They were just buried. No one knew what was really in them, but it was all these toxic chemicals, very similar stuff. Groundwater, surface water, air, soil was all contaminated. After a cleanup action, they counted all the drums. There was over 17,000 drums that were removed from this site. So based on these two sites, it really made Congress move and motivated them to create the Superfund law. And then it's always worthwhile to mention Times Beach, which was another city or a small town, really a small town in Missouri, where they were using waste oil to keep the dust down from their dirt roads in this little town. What they didn't realize is that the waste oil had dioxins in them, high levels of dioxins, like extremely high levels of dioxins. People started getting sick, and ultimately, the town was evacuated, removed, and then a large cleanup action happened. If you notice, there's a QR code on this slide. If you haven't done it already, please just scan it, or take the URL, that web address, and go explore the EPA Superfund website. There's a lot of information on there, a lot more than I can tell you in these few short minutes. Next slide, please. So we talked about Superfund, but the actual law is called CERCLA. It's the Comprehensive Environmental Response. So comprehensive, large, big, looks at everything. Environmental response, right? So we're looking to clean up the environmental situation or urgency issues, as well as human health. Compensation, so there's funding, and then the Liability Act, which is, again, keeping responsible parties responsible. This was a law that was enacted in 1980, and it was set up to address emergency responses. And we'll talk quickly about what that means. The evaluation, so the information gathering and analysis, keeping responsible parties or potential responsible parties liable, and then ultimately cleaning up a site. So those are the 4 pillars of CERCLA. And next slide, please. So just to reiterate, so protecting human health and the environment, cleaning up sites, making the responsible party pay for the cleanup work. Not always is there a responsible party, and not always does the responsible party have the funding to pay for it. And that's when the federal government will step in. Involve communities into the Superfund process. So community involvement is critical to the whole Superfund program. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the community involvement plan. And then return the Superfund sites to a productive use. And we'll talk about a reuse, some reuse. We'll have a reuse conversation in a few slides. So next slide, please. So at the very beginning of this, we talked about removal, and then there was also remedial. So removal is still part of the Superfund process, but it's a little different. So in removal, we're talking about something quicker. Certainly emergency response, really quick, initiates within hours, could last days or could last even months. Emergency responses are all sorts of shapes and sizes. Some of them can go on for a while. Then we have a time critical removal action. We'll talk a little bit more about that in detail when it comes to JH Baxter, because we expect that we will take a time critical removal action on some parts of the facility itself. And then there's something called the non-time critical removal. That's when you have a planning period that's a little bit longer than 6 months, and there's a lot of nuance in there. But the important thing here is if you're looking at those timeline of events where it says the Superfund removal process, you'll see where there's basically an assessment phase, a removal phase, and a post-removal phase. And that's the important part. As you go from emergency response to non-time critical, you'll see that there's a few added steps. There's a few more things that the agency, the EPA, needs to do to take action and to ultimately see those actions through. Next slide, please. And then we have the remedial process. This is when people say Superfund, this is typically what people are talking about, right? This is the remedial process where you have an assessment phase where we're currently in, and we'll get to that a little bit more. Then you have the characterization phase where you're actually doing a lot more evaluation. You're going into a lot more sampling, coming up with feasibility plans and different proposals and cost estimates. Well, if we did it this way, what's the cost and how long could it take? If we did it this way, what's the cost and how long it will take, and how protective is it? And so in this phase, which is the remedial investigation feasibility study, this is when you basically put a proposal together with community involvement to ultimately select a remedy, and then you go through the cleanup process and the post-construction. Like I mentioned earlier, if you go to that Superfund website, there's so much detail on this, and it's very straightforward. It's meant for non-government folks to go through the website and read these things. And there's examples, and there's different links, and it's a good site. If there's any questions after, we can certainly talk about that. Next slide, please. What I want to highlight is the community involvement plan. So if a site ends up becoming a Superfund site, then there's a community involvement plan that's created. And I wanted to highlight this because the community involvement process, we already have community involvement going on, but this is more of a formalized plan that EPA creates specifically for informing and engaging with community members, going in a lot of detail about the Superfund process, each step along the way. The document will describe the site. It will describe the community that lives there. It also will go through the questions and concerns and any technical assistance that's needed. Community interviews are really essential to creating this document, and we do a lot of community interviews, and that is used to develop a full CIP, so a community involvement plan. You know, you hope that it's a well-written document, and it will hopefully enable y'all that are affected, or communities that are affected by the Superfund site, to understand in which ways they can participate, be part of the decision-making process, where they can provide feedback, and where and when conversations will happen, more public meetings, other community events, whatever it may be. And ultimately, it's a great opportunity to get feedback throughout. And a community involvement plan, it is a living document. So it's not, you don't write the document and it just sits there. It's a living document that will grow as the site and as the relationships grows throughout the process. Next slide, please. So I did want to touch on the reuse and redevelopment. Again, there's a QR code here. EPA has a really good website on reuse, redevelopment, how that process works. I do want to highlight that the conversation about reuse and redevelopment often does happen once a site is proposed and becomes an MPLs or national priorities list or a Superfund site. And you start going through that RIFS process and you go through that whole Superfund remedial process, reuse and redevelopment conversation can and should happen throughout, right? You want to make sure that whatever remedy is proposed and selected and implemented supports the reuse and the redevelopment of the site. And so the conversation should go in parallel. But ultimately, reuse and redevelopment does not happen until the site is ultimately cleaned up and or taken off the Superfund site list. Again, this is a great opportunity to work with the community, working with the government, working with local government and neighbors to work through a redevelopment plan, explore the different opportunities, what the site might turn into, if you want to go back to an industrial or commercial, a shopping mall, housing, a park, disc golf course, energy creator, whatever it may be. There's lots of options, and that happens in this relationship with the community and the local and federal governments. And ultimately, it's like, and be supportive. It takes a village to get these things to the finish line, and once a plan is developed and I guess implemented, support the plan. The more support behind it, the more likely it will be successful. Next slide, please. And there's a QR code here. I wanted to talk, Superfund sometimes can be scary. It doesn't and shouldn't have to be. This is a map of the country. These are all the Superfund sites or proposed Superfund sites, or even previously now delisted Superfund sites. That QR code will take you to a web page that looks very similar to this map. It's an interactive map. You can zoom in and out. You can zoom right to your neighborhood. You can zoom to the state of Oregon. You can see the ongoing NPL sites, Superfund sites, and you can click on them and you can learn about them. You can see the history. You can see the issues. This gives anyone the power to really learn what's going on in your neighborhood or where you live. Next slide, please. So now that I think we got a good background of the Superfund process and what removal is versus what remedial, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about where EPA is currently involved with GH Baxter and the things that we've been doing over the last 2 years. I just want to highlight right up front, maybe it's on your mind, I know it's on my mind, there is a possibility that the federal government can shut down. I think even by the end of this week, there's so many things going on in the news, I can't keep up anymore, but I think that's still a possibility. I want to bring that up because when I think about the government shutting down and I think about J.H. Baxter, I think if I was a community member, I would think of safety. Well, what does this mean for safety in terms of what happens if something should happen and the federal government isn't here? I want to highlight that EPA has a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week emergency response program with duty officers and response officers on call. Even if the government shuts down, those duty officers are exempted, they still work. And we have contract support and money, regardless of, again, the government shutting down or not, to support any emergency response actions that we would have. So if something should happen, that's an environmental hazard, like a tank or something having some issues, EPA, even if we're shut down, will still have an emergency response program and would respond to those activities. So I have 2 or 3 more slides here discussing the tank farm sampling and how that may support a time critical removal action, and then our integrated sampling and how that could support a Superfund remedial process or a Superfund site. So next slides, please. All right, so back just this fall, I guess we're still in the fall, so that's good. EPA finalized our field sampling of the J.H. Baxter facility, and we focused primarily on the tank farm and the products in the tanks. Here's a great picture. We were up on one of the tanks. I believe we sampled around 60 of the tanks. There's also large totes. A tote is about a 250-gallon container, and then some drums that hold 55 gallons worth of material. We are actively evaluating the data that we received from that sampling effort, and that data is critical for us to evaluate the need and the implementation of a time critical removal action. So a little timeline here. So we did our initial reconnaissance in March. We developed a sampling strategy in June, and then we implemented that sampling strategy in September. We are currently evaluating, and we're also developing a scope of work and a cost estimate for that time critical removal action. The big piece of that removal action will be to empty the tanks and whatever solid material and liquid material are in those tanks and dispose of them, as well as any asbestos material that is insulating the tanks or pipes, taking the tanks down, cleaning the tanks, taking the concrete, the secondary containment down, and disposing of the concrete, any piping, and anything associated with anything in those areas will be taken down, disposed of, either by recycling or disposing, or either way, taking off site. The hope is that that activity will start in winter or spring, hopefully sooner. So sometime in winter or spring, that action will start. It's going to be costly, and so based on the cost of this removal action, we have to go through EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. and get concurrence, which we've already been working with them. They know it's coming, and they're going to concur it, but it's a formality. Next slide, please. Then I wouldn't say lastly, but then next, we've been working on this integrated assessment where this is site-wide, and site-wide doesn't mean just the J.H. Baxter facility, which is the 31 acres, and not just the residential properties to the north, but also downstream, right? We want to see and evaluate what, if any, contamination not only has left the facility via air, right? So maybe it went up in the air in the stacks and it settled down, or it blew off from a dust, as well as it ran off from stormwater, heavy rain events, or anything along those lines. Again, J.H. Baxter was in operation since 1943. A lot of the environmental regulations really didn't start until the 80s and the 90s. So there was a lot of opportunity for pentachlorophenol and creosote and other material to easily migrate off the property. And so that's why we do environmental sampling in the waterways that lead off the facility. So we follow the water, we follow the flow. And so this information will be used to evaluate possible inclusion to the national priorities list to see if it's be eligible for a Superfund site. Next slide, please. And so that's where we are. Again, there's a QR code here. We are still in the assessment phase, but we are at the point where we are now evaluating the data to see if it's eligible to be included or at least proposed to the national priorities list, the NPL. There's a lot of science in there. There's a huge formula. There's a lot of people involved. There's contractors that we're working with our headquarters folks to make sure that the data is formatted right and evaluated right and compared correctly against the proper comparisons. I think that's all I have. So next slide. Yep. And so here we are for questions. I know that's a lot. And I'm sure that I'm seeing chat, so I'm sure there's a lot of questions. So hopefully we can answer them.
There's actually only one question that's remaining. We've been answering questions. I don't know if everyone can see those questions. But the one right now that's up that we haven't answered is, has anyone tested the recycling company's soil which they are disrupting daily? Has anyone tested the recycling company's soil which they are disrupting daily? So Randy, have you all done anything with the recycling?
I'm assuming you're talking about Pacific Recycling, the neighbor of the Baxter facility.
That's what I'm assuming as well.
Yeah, we have not. That is not, they are not part of our investigation.
And Brad, do you know if the DEQ has done that?
We do. I'll let Don Hanson take that question.
Okay, Don, are you there? If so,
Hi there, everybody. Yeah, hopefully you can hear me, and I'll turn my video
There we
on. Yeah, I think the question, I think there's a question that says, has anybody tested the recycling company's soil, which they are disrupting daily? So I think they might be referring to Pacific Recycling as in the neighbor to the J.H. Baxter facility on the east side. And they are an active metal scrapyard recycler. They do a lot of industrial activity at that property. They purchased part of the J.H. Baxter site, gosh, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And part of that deal was they had to, the soil was tested, and they placed a soil cap on top of the site. And Pacific Recycling and any future owner of that property is required to maintain that, and there are limits on what they can do on that property. So I don't know about the disrupting daily part. If you're assuming that the soil is being disrupted daily, or they shouldn't be, there is a management plan that they're supposed to be complying with on that site.
Okay, thank you, Don. Appreciate that. We have another question here. It says, it sounds like the DEQ and EPA that you're still trying to define the extent of contamination. Are most of the properties with elevated concentrations, in parentheses, above 40 parts per trillion, located to the north of Roosevelt Boulevard? Are there impacted properties with soil contamination located to the west of J.H. Baxter? Randy.
Yeah, I don't know who that's to, but I'll take a stab. We are still actively trying to define the nature and extent of the contamination. Like I mentioned, 80 years is a long time. If you have the availability to just go back in time and look at some old aerial imagery from the 40s and 50s and 60s, it was a farming community that turned into West Eugene as it is today. And so there's been a lot of reworking, and roads and other Roosevelt Boulevard and various other things have been developed over the course of 80 years. And so it's not as simple as just going out and, we have to do all of those data gap. We have to evaluate. So we continue to do our step out sampling. And if we don't feel like we find the end, or we found the end, then we will continue to sample. So there's still a lot of effort there, but I don't think we found the edge, if that's the ultimate question that you asked.
I think I'm reading into it another piece, and that is regarding the highest levels of contamination, and those highest levels of contamination are primarily due north of the facility.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful, I'm sure. Other questions? Right now, we have a blank Q&A. Oh, and while I was trying to fly the plane, looking at these other things on my control panel, two just came in. So wind patterns are both north and south in this area. Is EPA testing the soils of the businesses to the south?
Not currently. The reason why we target residential properties is because people spend majority of their time there. And so, not being a risk assessor or a toxicologist, but I do know that risk numbers and ultimately cleanup numbers are based on the land use. So if it's a residential property, those risk numbers and those cleanup numbers will be lower than if it was a commercial facility or an industrial facility, because arguably people are spending 8 hours or less there a day, 40 hours a week, opposed to children that will play in a yard, spend 100 hours a week, in their house and various other things. So we are actively targeting residential communities and neighborhoods for that exact reason. Not to say that some of these areas might have concerns, but likely those concerns are not as emergent as residential areas.
Great, thank you for that. Next one is, what is the residential perimeter that has been tested so far? Can you say, basically what the roads are around that have been tested so far? I know we can't, out of respect and privacy for the property owners themselves, just Lisa, so you know, we can't say exactly which houses, but I think that Susan, are you going to answer that one?
Yes, I was going to say the southern boundary is Roosevelt Boulevard, and the western boundary so far is La Casa Street. And then the eastern boundary is Coralie, I think. Alba Park Drive. Coralie. Trying to get the map up.
Okay.
It's Coralie.
Coralie, thanks.
Okay, great. We have a question about that. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. Because before that is another one that says, what exactly is the benefit of becoming a Superfund site? What could you do with that designation that you can't do now?
That's the $1 million question. These cleanups are very expensive. Contamination is far and wide. It can be far and wide. So it provides an enforcement opportunity to enforce against the potential responsible party. I use the word potential because that's just the word, that's the language in the law itself. But yeah, so it definitely puts the responsible party on the table and gives some teeth to enforce against them and to potentially direct them to clean it up if they have the pockets. Secondly, it opens up a huge financial piggy bank, so to speak. The Superfund has a lot more money. So I guess I did not say in detail the difference between the removal program and the remedial program. removal program doesn't have a large budget. The removal program covers, at least here in Oregon, which is at a EPA region 10. So there's 4 states in part of region 10. It's Oregon, Idaho, Washington, and Alaska. And of those 4 states, the removal program gets around $10 million. And that $10 million is used to buy equipment, buy sampling equipment, pay for our warehouses, as well as emergency responses, time critical removals in other neighborhoods, planning and preparedness training, all the business that EPA does over the 4 states, which is a lot of business. So ultimately, it leaves about half of that money available to do work, removal actions. I mentioned earlier that the time critical removal for just the tank farm is going to be expensive, that I'm going to need to go and get concurrence from headquarters. It's likely to be in excess of $6 million, that removal, maybe even higher. And that is just the tank farm. That's not the soils, which is 31 acres, and the residential and anything downstream, which could be in the tens of millions of dollars. So that's where the Superfund designation really comes in to help, because it opens up a larger checkbook to help pay for these cleanups.
Great. Okay, thanks, Randy. Brad,
Yep.
did you want to add something to that from the state's perspective? And that's Randy from EPA's perspective. From the state's perspective, is there anything you want to add here?
Very similar from the state's perspective. Our state orphan budget is very small compared to what EPA brings as far as funding and even manning personnel. So they really bring in the ability to do things that we can't really do on the scope that they do. And that's really what they come with. The 7 yards we're cleaning now, we've estimated at about $1 million with oversight costs and everything, and that's about 10% of a 4-year orphan site budget for the state of Oregon, which has to spread across a lot of sites. So EPA comes with much deeper pockets. They come with a bigger staff and more enforcement teeth as well.
So really, essentially, you're adding capacity to what exists at this time, both in human resources and fiscal resources, and timeliness to get stuff done. Great. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that question. Next one is, the last sampling done was in March at the Coralie Dead End. What was the results of those, and maybe testing further out, and when?
The results of the Coralie sampling were quite low, either below our 4.7 parts per trillion residential cleanup standard, and below 40 parts per trillion. And so given that it's relatively not contaminated or not highly contaminated, I don't know that we'll be stepping out a whole lot further to the east. However, we do know that we need to do some additional sampling, and we have not determined or figured out yet when that sampling is going to take place.
Well, all right, so there may be more sampling. We're not sure when, and we're not, right now, you're not thinking it's going to go past the Coralie. Got it. Okay, thank you, Susan. Next question. It looked like on one of your photos that the ditch across the street from J.H. Baxter splits around Beltline, and the north ditch may go to Golden Garden Ponds. Your photo doesn't go that far north. Do you know if there is a connection? Anyone?
I'm assuming that was to me on the photo that I shared.
Probably.
Right. Honestly, I don't know Golden Gate Ponds or that area, so I don't know how to answer that question. And that was just a screen cap. It doesn't actually mean that was all our sampling locations and various other things. That was more of a representative of the work that we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that would probably be someone from DEQ might know that, but I don't think he's joined us this evening. Susan or Don or Brett? Any idea about the Golden Garden ponds? No, okay. So Suzanne, what we'll do is, we will get an answer back to you. So we'll make sure that we've noted that and get an answer back to you at another time. So sorry about that. And thank you for your question. Another question, how far does the stream extend past the J.H. Baxter facility? Does it reach far into other parts of Eugene? Oh, and someone just pinged my thing saying there is someone from the city who might be able to answer that. So John, so hang on before you answer that last question. Let's go back to, let me get John Wilson. I'm gonna promote you to a panelist so we can see you, John. So join us if you would. And then we'll get an answer to that Golden Garden Pond. It's coming. Hang on a second. You have to turn your camera on if you can, John. And there he is. Great. Okay. So now take it off mute. There we go. Excellent. And then Golden Garden Ponds. What do you think?
Yeah, as I understand it, Golden Gardens Ponds is not downstream from this facility.
It's not downstream from this facility. Okay.
Right. So water from the area that we're concerned about would not flow through Golden Gardens Ponds.
Okay. Great. All right. Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. Really appreciate you being willing to pop in here and help with that. And so now let's ask this other one again. How far does the stream extend past the J.H. Baxter facility? Does it reach far into other parts of Eugene?
I'll take the first stab at that. I mean, everything heads. This might be a better question for John Wilson again, but everything.
This might work for John. Yes, John.
Everything heads west, but I'll pass over to John since he's back.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. How far does the stream extend past the J.H. Baxter facility? Does it reach far into other parts of Eugene?
Well, it follows the A3 channel, so it would go behind Danabo and then into Fern Ridge, and from Fern Ridge it would join the Long Tom River.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for being there. All right. Thanks, John. And then we got regarding history of the area. Have you found more information about Baxter Road being an old truck entrance to the facility? You know, that was something that was considered at one time. Anybody have an answer to that one yet?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have an answer for it, but we are evaluating that. We've looked at old land use. We have access to some old aerial imagery, thanks again to the city of Eugene and John Wilson, his team. And looking at that aerial, Baxter Street did, before Roosevelt Boulevard existed, Baxter Street came right into the facility. Until Roosevelt Boulevard was created. So that is an option. It's a possibility that either trucks or people that work there drove in and out.
Great. Okay. Thank you. All right. So we got that one. Let's go to the next one. Senator Manning, thank you. And please raise your hand if you'd like to say some words here at the end of these questions. We'd love to have you say a little bit to everyone. I know you're interested in talking to folks about this. The question is, are there reports of sickness that could be contributed to J.H. Baxter? And I think, David, if you could turn on your camera and join us.
Yeah. So I would start by saying that that's a harder question to answer than you might think. So we've certainly heard anecdotally, we've definitely heard community members tell us that, like, there's definitely people who are sick around J.H. Baxter. We don't really have a way to tell whether that is attributable to J.H. Baxter in particular, and we don't know whether there's more people that are sick around J.H. Baxter than in other parts of Eugene, in a systematic way, if that makes sense. I think that People have done surveys in the neighborhood to ask people if about their health and in the neighborhood. Those have been done by like Beyond Toxics comes to mind. I know that they've done a lot of work about that, like engaging with the community and asking those kinds of questions and doing those kinds of surveys. But there hasn't been like a systematic. We don't have a way to do a systematic agency. We don't have databases for all the kinds of diseases that one would connect with dioxins, for example, or other contaminants at J.H. Baxter. So because we don't know what like so those things make it really difficult to say that any particular person's illness is caused by J.H. Baxter. There's really no way to scientifically say that with any confidence.
Okay, so that's the nature of public health studies that you've done at this point. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and the way that our program tends to approach this kind of a thing is starting from the environmental sampling data. So rather than starting from the community and seeing what illness rates are, instead, we look at environmental sampling data and see what levels of contaminants are there, and then use that information to compare against what we already know about the health effects of those chemicals to look forward at potential risks to people, to the community. So, and that's something that we've covered in our health consultation document that we can put the link to it in the chat, which is available for people to read.
Yeah, let's do that. Put that link available for folks. Great. And make sure that you do link the chat to everyone when you do that chat, okay? Good. All right. Thank you, David. And then the next question is, how close is the site to any residential areas? Is there a COI in place for this project? I'm guessing what that's to Randy. And can you say what COI is so everybody understands that?
Yeah, actually, I'm not exactly sure what COI is for this. I have lots of different acronyms that I can put in for COI. But the residential community is just 200 feet, maybe 100 or so yards from J.H. Baxter itself. So very close. But yeah, Nick, if you can let us know what you mean by COI.
Okay, so we'll let him know. Let's see if he's written anything there. We'll watch for that. So then this is something that I think was back to your answer earlier about the north and south soil sampling. So true, but it would be important to know if the soils both north and south are contaminated. Contaminated, wouldn't it? Part of the larger assessment. So can you say something about the south end? Yeah.
And we do have a few samples that were collected south of the facility, and we will, that is in the long-term plan to evaluate the entire area for potential contamination from the facility. Okay. However, we're focused, as Randy said earlier, on cleaning up the residential properties, since they're the most, most likely to be impacted by the contamination.
A lot of time there? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Good. All right. Thank you. Let's see. Do we know how many months, possibly years, neighbors will be waiting who are under 40 to have their yards decontaminated? Just curious. I understand the higher, the more emergent. Not sure what that is, but any sense of when the yards are going to be clean?
Unfortunately for that, population of the yards, we don't have a good answer for that.
Oh, under 40 parts per trillion.
Yeah.
I was thinking under 40 years old. I was thinking it was an age issue. Sorry. Yeah, read the question wrong as I was reading it. So you don't have a question for folks who are under 40 parts per trillion for having their yards cleaned at this point. Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you. And I did hear you say, unfortunately. So thank you for that, Susan. Right. Yeah, I know we all of us are well aware, having been working on this for a while, that some of the answers are these aren't gonna make you happy, some of these answers. Some of them are frustrating to everybody that you're seeing right here. They unfortunately are the way the process is working right now. And everybody's trying to bring as many of the resources together and to bear to be able to help the neighborhood. And that kind of applies to that one question about what can you do with a Superfund listing that you can't do today. So here's another question. In the first photo shown, there was a playhouse in the yard that you are cleaning up. Is there a danger of contamination in the playhouse?
I don't think so. I honestly don't know exactly how long the playhouse has been there, but the soil has been accumulating dioxin contamination for a large number of years, and I suspect that that is what we're concerned about, is in the soil, dioxins in the soil. They tend to the dioxins, because of their chemical properties, tend to stick to soil particles. They don't dissolve in water. They don't like to move.
Okay. Okay. All right. So at this time, you don't think there is a danger of contamination? Okay. Great. And I know in past public meetings, I've heard you all and have heard the health authorities suggest if anybody's concerned, using soap and water to clean something out and off would be a useful thing to do. So Dave, you want to say something there?
Yeah, I think that's a good option. Any dioxin would be stuck to soil particles. So if you get rid of the dirt, you're getting rid of the dioxin also. So
Okay.
so cleaning out, so cleaning out the playhouse could be helpful.
Okay, great. Good, thank you for that. And next question. I understand that some fill dirt was moved from J.H. Baxter and used as fill-in construction of a new local park. What level of contamination is seen at this park, and are there other records of material movement from the site? Anybody know about that? Don?
Yeah, we're not aware of any soil being moved from this site for a very long time. Like, we would, I think, be DEQ or RAPA or various inspectors would have been aware if there would have been soil movement from this site. And so we're certainly not aware of that, and also not aware of any yeah, I'm not sure what new park even is around there. So not aware of that. Don't think it was from the Baxter site.
Okay, and I see somebody's added in at the end of the list for the questions. Because I'm now scrolling through them a little faster than I'm seeing some of these. I've heard that soil went to train song, but what I'm hearing you say, Don, is that you have not heard that.
Well, we've talked to the city a lot about Train Song Park, and they have a pretty good understanding about the construction of that park, and there's been no discussion about J.H. Baxter as being a source of contamination at Train Song Park.
And I also see John Wilson from the city of Eugene saying he is also not aware of this. So thanks for the question, Kenneth. And none of these folks know about that right now. So maybe they can, if you have information about that, Kenneth, maybe share that with DEQ. That would be, I think, helpful to everybody if you've got information about that. So thank you for the question. And then I've got a however, OHA did find, since back to David, when you were talking, however, OHA did find higher rates of lung cancer and NHL. You have to say what NHL is. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There it is. I just got it. Yeah.
Right, and that's actually incorrect. So we did see higher rates of slightly higher rates of lung cancer, and borderline, barely higher levels of another kind of lymphoma called Hodgkin's lymphoma. So it's instead of non-Hodgkin's, it's Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was very it was kind of right on the border. And again, that doesn't mean that we can't we don't know we don't know why there are higher levels. That nothing about our analysis tells you why levels might be higher.
Just that they
So
are.
yeah, we looked for, I think it's important to also remind people, we looked for 22 different cancer types and looked for that analysis. We did that same analysis to see if there were higher than expected levels of 22 different cancer types. And most of them, so all of them except for those two, were either the same as expected or even low. Some of them were lower than expected for a population that size. So it was these two, lung cancer and Hodgkin's lymphoma, that were slightly higher than expected.
All right, thank you. And then the next question is more information for everybody. So let me just read this to everybody. I've lived here 55 years. A lot of trucks and people entered off Baxter Street. Baxter was just repaved after probably 50 years. As I know, Alva Park Drive was repaved when my brother was about 9-ish and he's 63 now. Those roads are dead ends at that time. Were dead ends at that time. So just some information for everybody to have in terms of what's been happening with some of the repaving in the area. So thank you for that, Kimberly. Really appreciate that. And then Nick has come back and said, my apologies, I wasn't able to go back into the slides to verify the acronym. I'm referring to the Community Integration Plan, the CIP, that Randy discussed in his previous slides. Wondering what the level of community involvement is at this point, or what that will look like as this project progresses. Great, good question. I'm sure that not everybody's not actually. When else
Right.
is involved?
Right. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, the CIP is created, would be created once, if and when a site, any site is becomes a Superfund site. So it'd be listed to the NPL, the National Priorities List. So that's when that document would officially start being created. Now, we're already doing community involvement. You know, we already have community involvement, and Office of Public Affairs heavily involved with the project. And so it's an informal we're formally doing it, but it's an informal process where we don't necessarily have a CIP in place yet. And I don't know if one of the Office of Public Affairs folks would like to add to that, but I think that answer satisfies that question.
Okay. Alice or Rocky, do you want to add anything? I don't see it popping your cameras up. Okay, I'll go to the next question then. Thank you. Please explain the ways that EPA and DEQ is holding the Baxter company responsible for their fines and the costs of this cleanup. Are there new developments on that end? Right.
I can go first, or just be the only. So EPA, we have sent and received. We've sent a general notice letter, basically informing JH Baxter that they have wastes and that they need to go. Basically, that there's environmental concerns there, and we're putting them on notice. At the same time, we sent them financial requests and received financial information, back taxes, and all of those other things. And we are actively doing an ability to pay analysis to see what, if anything, they have, so we can then have them do a piece of the cleanup or something, or maybe nothing at all. But that's one of the steps that we have to do. So we basically requested the financial information, doing an ability to pay analysis. And based on that, we'll either enforce them to do something, or enforce them to support us doing something. They have a lot of knowledge on the site, and they still have some workers there. And if EPA is going to disassemble and dispose of most of the products and the tanks on that property, having institutional knowledge of how that facility works, where all the different valves and the electrical and all the things is extremely important and valuable. And EPA can easily order them to provide that resource to us if they have no financial means to provide to us in our efforts.
And I can add a little bit of clarification just to let everybody know that the Oregon Department of Justice and EPA's attorneys have not exhausted everything. So they are still working to recoup the cost.
Okay.
Thank you, Susan. I'll just add, something to point out. The bulk of the DEQ officials here today are from our cleanup program. And there's actually an ongoing enforcement case about some hazardous waste violations and wastewater violations. And Baxter actually signed an agreement to pay a fine a while back now, which they haven't paid. But by doing that, they're actually accruing interest. And so that penalty is increasing. And to Susan's point, we're then working with the Department of Justice and others to try to get a better sense of the financials. And that is ongoing. That's an ongoing enforcement case, though. Oh, and I just learned this recently. You don't say enforcement case at DEQ. You say enforcement order. It was an enforcement order and a settlement agreement with them. So
Great.
Correcting myself.
So I've got 6 questions, although 2 of them, soil could be tracked into a playhouse. Yes, we answered that one, saying yes, maybe. So clean it with some water, soap and water. I've heard that soil went to train song. We answered that one. Good. This one is done. Please let everyone know that Active Bethel community receives J.H. Baxter cleanup updates, and they can sign up for our monthly email newsletter on our activebethelcitizens.org website. So that you should be able to see that one in your question and answer. Hopefully all of you should see the Active Bethel Citizens, all one word, .org, their website. And then we have one other question, and then I want to just see if Senator Manning wants to say anything here towards the end. Has Georgia Baxter paid the existing DEQ fines from when they were still in business? Does anybody know the answer to that question? Brad?
I think Dylan did a pretty good job of covering it earlier, but there are still existing fines from Has Waste in regards to J.H. Baxter, but we are working on getting a settlement there.
Great. Okay. So I'm leaving Lynn's question there just for everyone to write down that website if you want it. I think that I was able to, I think what I'm going to try and do, just in case it didn't work, I tried to post for the health authority something. I'm going to type an answer here to Lynn's by pasting the information that David wanted to give you about the health assessment. So let's send that answer. Oh, but I don't know if it worked. Did that work? Can you see the health assessment information anyway? I put it as a response.
You have to go to
Lynn.
the answered questions.
Good.
You have to
And there it
open
is.
up. Yep.
Good. So go to the answer questions, go to the bottom, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see that link for you there. Okay. So let me just see. Here he is. So I'm just going to promote. If you'd like to join us, and if you'd like to say a couple of words, Senator Manning, as our one elected official who is here tonight, I think. Looking through here again. If you would like to say something, please join us. Or I can allow you to talk. Oh, must be popping in here. Okay. And if you can turn your camera on, if you're there. I'm losing. Okay, all right. I get it. I got the not needed at this time. Okay, so thank you so much for coming. Appreciate that. And really want to appreciate that everybody has joined us this evening and that you've spent the whole evening with us. And it is, let's see. Yeah, good. Okay, so no meeting, no. All right. So thank you all for being here. I want to thank the folks from DEQ, from EPA, from the Health Authority, from the City of Eugene, from everywhere who's popping in here and answering some of the questions. But really want to thank all of the community members that took time tonight out of your busy schedules to find out what else is going on at the JH Baxter site. It's been a pleasure being with you tonight. We can stay for a couple more minutes if there's any last questions that are going through your minds now. If anybody wants to ask anything, I got one just popped up. Has the health assessment been updated since the public comment closed on July 31st? If not, when can we expect the update? Thank you, John.
Yes, it hasn't been updated yet. We're looking, we think we can get it early in early spring of next year. We're working through the comments. The longest part is the review process sort of internally. Like we're working on the responses right now.
Okay. So early spring of 2024. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for that question, Lisa. And John has said, thank you all. As a question. Yeah, you can use the question and answer for comments like that as well. So thank you everybody again for joining. As I say, we'll hang out here just a little bit longer, but if others want to either send notes or just sign on off, really appreciate you being here. And I think we'll keep the recording going a little bit longer in case we do get a couple more questions. Thank you for keeping us updated. Is what we got. So thank you very much for that, Kimberly. Our pleasure, and we'll look forward to doing this again as soon as there's more to update you on. I think one of the things that we have said at the public meetings in the past, and we say it regularly with the core team, is we want to make sure that when all these folks come together to talk to you, that they actually have something new to share with you. So that is part of what we're trying to do tonight. It's what we will do again if there's more information coming your way that you'd be interested in. The Active Bethel Citizens website and their newsletter is a great source of updates as well. And also Beyond Toxic has information on their website. Anybody else?
Donna, I just want to thank the community members that shared their knowledge of how the roads were used. You guys have a lot more experience in your community than we do. So we thank you not only for coming to listen to us, but to come and share your experience and your knowledge of the community and how the impact has been with us, because that helps us as we go through this process.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Brad. And I think next time we'll probably our next public meeting will be sometime in February, Marchish is my guess, given what I've been hearing from folks tonight. That'll probably be the next round of information to be shared. And no, we did not say we're to get the recording once it is posted. Dylan, do you want to say something about that? There is one more question here. Is JH Baxter plant considered one of the worst polluted sites in Eugene city history? That's a question, right? And by DEQ or EPA's assessment, just getting that clear. Anybody know?
I'm really new to DEQ, so I'm probably not the right one to answer that question.
I can take a stab. I would say it's not going to be probably a very good answer or satisfying answer, but every site's different, I think. And Baxter is I guess it's a bad site because there are offsite receptors, third-party receptors, people in their homes that have been contaminated by the site. We have many sites that the contamination doesn't even go off the property, industrial sites and things like that. So in that regard, it is bad. And there are other sites where there's, this site doesn't really have, it has groundwater contamination, but it's not really impacting people's wells. And we have other sites not necessarily in Eugene, but in Lane County where there's groundwater contamination and people's wells are impacted, or maybe the Springfield Utility Board's wells are potentially impacted. So that's a bad site in its own way, and we're working on that and also. So I know it's not very satisfying, but that kind of gives you a perspective of the range of sites that we deal with. And I say we have hundreds of sites in Eugene. So, well, most of them are pretty small and easy to clean up. Hope that helps.
All right. Thank you, Don. And we'll see what that says there. All right, thanks. Brian says, thank you, Brian. And good about that. And then, so yeah, there was that question or a comment about Dylan. Your hand is there. I know you're going to answer what I was about to say. So just get him and say it.
When I think was the question where to find the video.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you search Oregon DEQ Baxter, DEQ, we have an informational webpage about the J.H. Baxter facility. And on that, you'll eventually find a link to DEQ's YouTube channel, and the video will be posted there. And so it's going to take a little bit because we have to work on some captions for it. But I think the last time it was up in within a month, and I hope it will be a little quicker this time around. I should stop saying so much to then shorten the captions. But I'll just also note that EPA and OHA and also LRAPA, which Lane Regional Air Protection Agency, we all have informational web pages about Baxter. So if you plug in EPA and J.H. Baxter Eugene, you'll find more info from EPA. I got mentioned Oregon DEQ Baxter, then Oregon Health Authority and LRAPA as well. So thank you.
Super, great. I also want to just remind everybody, if you haven't seen, there is a story map. You can put in J.H. Baxter story map. And it was suggested in a chat to me that perhaps we could make a link on that story map as we have in the past to the recording for this one. So, so if you're somebody who wants to find out more about the site, if you're new to this whole thing, you want to see more, then please check out the J.H. Baxter story map. Okay, well, it looks as though we have come to a trickle on the question and answer. So I'm going to be mindful of the fact that it's 7:42. And thank everybody again. I want to thank you all so much for coming tonight. Really appreciate you being here. Please stay in touch with folks if you find new information from community members, if you find information that you think the state, the city, EPA, any of these agencies should have, please do reach out to them. And let them know your lived experience is important as we've heard about. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. With that, I'm going to stop the recording.